New Yorkers' concerns, enforcing the New York City Health Code requirement to maintain properties free of rats by directing property owners to take action on their property to control rats or the conditions that support them, extermination by licensed pest management professionals on private properties when the owner fails to act, and billing for the work, providing guidance and technical assistance to city agencies, as well as monitoring city properties and referring areas in need of rat control, and sealing or collapsing rat burrows by a stoppage team to help control rat activity in the public realm. New Yorkers can learn more about Health Department's activities on its Environment and Health Data Portal and check inspection outcomes for specific property on the agency's rat information portal. Health Department inspection data indicates that rat activity in New York City neighborhoods is not equally distributed. Some neighborhoods bear a higher burden of rat infestation. Those neighborhoods tend to be densely populated with high foot traffic, an abundance of food service establishments, and a higher proportion of public property. To effectively address rats, city agencies, property owners, and residents in these areas must work together. The Health Department maintains a robust outreach and education program to help residents, property owners, and pest management professionals learn best practices for controlling rats. The Health Department plays a central role in the city mitigation efforts by serving as the lead agency for analysis, reporting, and evaluation of rat mitigation efforts. The department also offers technical support for training to partner agencies so that staff are trained in best practices. The department's research team takes the lead on testing new products and evaluation of different pest management methods. The Department of Building enforces building codes and local laws in constructions and building sites. This includes enforcement of pre-building permit certification of retaining a licensed exterminator as required by Local Law 109 of 2022, rodent-proofing construction code requirements, and construction site housekeeping. The Department of Sanitation, who will detail their contribution to citywide rat mitigation, collects recycling, disposes of waste, and cleans streets. DSNY takes 24 million pounds of trash, recycling, and compostable material off the city streets every day. Much of that comprises of the primary food source of New York City's rats. For successful long-term rat mitigation to be realized, robust management of New York City streets, including waste, is essential. From litter baskets to tree pits to parks to schools to NYCHA developments, every food source and potential home for rodents must be considered when building a plan to eliminate them. Mayor Adams' commitment to citywide integrated pest management, including changes from the Department of Sanitation, will ensure long-term rat-free New York. Public properties, for example, public schools, parks, NYCHA, are responsible for keeping their city-managed assets clean and rat-free. As a citywide director of rodent mitigation, I serve as the central voice for New York City's mitigation efforts, providing organization and direction to the many facets of a citywide pest management program. The RATSAR supports agencies as they innovate, drives individual and collective accountability, and breaks down silos to build a unified strategy. I also meet with internal and external stakeholders to discuss challenges and build scaled solutions. Some successes. The Rat Action Plan legislated codification of the rodent mitigation zones, expanded categories of constructions projects requiring rodent abatement, mandated rodent-proof containers at properties with repeat pest violations, and allowed for changing of waste set-out times. The design and maintenance guidelines dictated in the permanent outdoor dining program also underscore the interjurisdictional commitment to rat mitigation. The Rat Task Force, which meets monthly, is comprised of representatives from the Department of Health, Parks, New York City Public Schools, NYCHA, DSNY, Mayor's Office of Small Business Services, Department of Transportation, Mayor's Community Affairs Unit, and Housing Preservation and Development. Representation in the Rat Task Force continues to expand as mitigation efforts are integrated across all facets of city government. In the past 6 months, the Rat Task Force has piloted the development of site-specific IPM plans, collaborated on strategic enforcement, directed agencies to implement best extermination strategies, deepened agency alignment, and collaborated on neighborhood engagement and intervention. It is through this authentic collaboration and problem solving that sustainable progress is made. Connecting with New Yorkers is a core tenet in the city's approach to rat mitigation. The Health Department's rat academies, NYCHA Tenant Association visits and family day tabling events, neighborhood and community garden walkthroughs, and anti-rat days of actions are all examples of the work we do to connect city resources to New Yorkers and New Yorkers to information. The Health Department's Rat Information Portal is a tool available to New Yorkers to explore the results of all pest control inspections and access information on rat prevention. The Health Department's neighborhood indexing allows for targeted interventions and monitoring. This includes property and neighborhood level data collection with mapping and analysis to better understand areas of highest rat burden. Conducting over 220,000 inspections in FY23, the Department of Health has unprecedented data on rat activity. Analysis of this data drives interagency strategy and private property interventions. New Yorkers can track progress by checking the Department of Health's Environment and Health Data Portal. City pest management teams have expanded the use of non-poison bait extermination methods, for example, carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide applications, targeted harborage conditions, and built sustainable mitigation results through exclusion. Perhaps most significantly, the Department of Sanitation's work to containerize waste ensures removal of rats' food source and severely impacts their ability to reproduce, repopulate, and spread further into our New York City community. We know our approach to rat mitigation is successful with consistent, routinized application. We continue to evaluate and refine strategies as we amplify and scale mitigation efforts. With data, science, and unprecedented collaboration, New York City is working harder than ever to mitigate rats, and we are confident in our ability to get stuff done. But our work cannot be done alone. Rats do not observe property lines or distinguish between public and private ownership. This means efforts to mitigate rats demand nothing less than full citywide participation. We look forward to partnering with you and all New Yorkers in this collective effort. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today to address this important topic. I would now like to pass to my colleague Joshua Goodman from Department of Sanitation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairs Nurse and Schulman, council members and staff. I'm Joshua Goodman, Deputy Commissioner of Public Affairs and Customer Experience of the Department of Sanitation. I'm joined today by First Deputy Commissioner Javier Lohan, and it is our honor to bring you updates from the front lines in the war on rats. New Yorkers are revolting, but not in the way the haters, doubters, and Angelinos and Bostonians have long argued. No, New Yorkers are leading a revolt, engaging in a revolution against the trash, against the old ways of doing things, and against the rats themselves. This trash revolution, a tidal wave of change in the management of 44 million daily pounds of waste, has swept across the city over the last 2 years, and New Yorkers are seeing the difference. In the prior 2 decades, the Department of Sanitation had focused on shifting our back-end operations from a model where all trash was dumped at Fresh Kills landfill to a waste export model, where all New York City trash moves by barge and rail car to destinations as far away as South Carolina. That was a tremendous behind-the-scenes undertaking, but it never addressed how New Yorkers experience the trash, even as other cities around the world innovated substantially. Residents and businesses continued to drop their smelly, leaky, and rat-attracting bags of trash on the sidewalk at 4 p.m. We had massive, tremendous piles of bags on our sidewalks just as rush hour was getting underway. And these piles sat and sat and sat, sometimes up to 36 hours before we picked it up. Well, that is now changing rapidly, thanks to Mayor Adams' commitment and vision to doing what has worked in other cities around the world. We started by changing the set-out times for trash. The 4 p.m. set-out time was the earliest of any major city in the United States, and it meant that rush hour became trash hour. We moved that time to 8 p.m., and incentivized containerization by allowing trash in bins to go out at 6 p.m. on the residential side or an hour before closing on the commercial side. We also shifted our operations to pick up that trash much, much sooner, sometimes within an hour of it being set out. This included moving more of our operations to a midnight shift, particularly in the city's rat mitigation zones, and getting 2,500 of the largest residential buildings onto routes that allowed for much faster service, among other things. We often don't notice what is not there, but if you think back, you can surely remember those massive piles of bags and the rats that made them their home or their home away from home. And if you look now, those piles are largely gone. As of this summer and fall, all food-based businesses, so restaurants, bodegas, delis, catering halls, bars, etc., and all chain businesses are now required to put their trash in an incredible invention, the wheelie bin. And this coming March, all businesses will be required to put their trash in these containers that work so well around the world. In fall 2024, residents who live in buildings with 1 to 9 units will be required to put their trash in containers. We are engaged in a procurement process to design the first ever official NYC bins, which will be available when this mandate goes into effect, and required approximately 2 years later. At that point, 70% of New York City trash will be in containers. And Commissioner Tisch has been clear that we are coming for the remaining 30%, mostly from the larger residential buildings. To containerize this trash, we are currently piloting on-street containers for schools and residential buildings in a section of Hamilton Heights uptown. We plan to further expand the containerization of trash from larger buildings, and we are developing a prototype automated side loader truck to accomplish this. These are the plays laid out in our containerization playbook, the Future of Trash report, viewable at nyc.gov/futureoftrash. We said what we were going to do, and we are getting it done, dramatically transforming our streetscapes and putting a dent in what used to be an all-night, all-you-can-eat buffet for rats. On behalf of my colleagues here today, we all look forward to answering your questions about our plan to stand up to the axis of filth represented by the rats, the bags of trash, and the old defensive status quo, and about the trash revolution taking back our streets. Thank you.
Thank you both for your testimony. I'm going to move into questions. So we wanted to talk first about rat mitigation zones. As part of the rat action plan, the city is required to establish the zones in high areas with levels of rat activity where city agencies can focus resources to address rats and the conditions that support them. Currently, these zones are in Brooklyn, which is inclusive of Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, the Bronx Grand Concourse Zone, and Manhattan, where we have the Harlem Zone, East Village, and Chinatown Zone. Some of the metrics used for establishing the rat mitigation zones, I'm just going to call them zones from now on, if that's cool, were listed in rulemaking. But can you describe the metrics used to establish the zones and how those metrics are prioritized in that establishment process? Is there a, well, we'll start there. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, good morning. Again, Corinne Schiff, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Health at the New York City Health Department. And so we worked with the council when you codified rat mitigation zones, and thank you for laying out the neighborhoods where those zones have been designated. As Kathy described, our program at the Health Department is evidence-based and data-driven. We conduct what we call indexing inspections, which are proactive inspections. We've been doing that since 2007. And what that does is it lets us know where rats are in New York City. And we know that not every neighborhood is burdened equally by rats. And so we have different approaches. We work throughout the city on rat control, but we take different approaches depending on what the evidence shows about the conditions in a particular neighborhood. And the rat mitigation zones are those areas of the city where we look to multiple criteria and find that those are the most burdened. So those factors are failed inspections, both our initial inspection and when we conduct a follow-up inspection. So we continue to find signs of rats and conditions conducive to rats. The numbers of times that the frequency with which the health department has to conduct extermination. So as Kathy mentioned, the New York City Health Code requires property owners to keep property free of rats. When we find rats, we will order the property owner to exterminate, but not every property owner complies. And so sometimes the health department has to step in and then bill the owner for that work. So that's one of the factors we use. How often is the health department needing to do that work? The percentage of city-owned property in the area, and the numbers of complaints. So we look at those things together, and where we find the highest burden, that's where we take our most intensive approach, the rat mitigation zone. But again, we have different approaches throughout the city.
Can you explain, just elaborate more on that percentage of city-owned properties, why that's a specific factor?
A couple of reasons. One, because those are areas that the city controls. And so we should be able to do work there to address those conditions. Also, those conditions can be ones that are very vulnerable. For example, parks property. Parkland can give rats a nice place to live, and so that can mean in a community that is an opportunity for rats. So it's not just one factor, it's multiple factors together that we see an opportunity for rats to thrive, and we focus our efforts most intensely there.
Are there any other agencies involved in that data collection and aggregation process for making those determinations?
So the data collection and analysis is done at the health department, and we have a robust surveillance team that's been doing this work for decades. The work to address those conditions is multi-agency, and that's really the point of the rat mitigation zones. It is us saying to our partner agencies, we need to be working on this together. As you heard and as you know, it takes all of us working together. I believe we've worked with all of you, for example, on rat academies to bring in your constituents to make sure that they also know best practices for addressing rats. So we work very closely after we have determined where the data should bring the cities to focus most intensively, and that is where the Director of Rodent Mitigation really helps us all come together.
Okay. How often are you reviewing or revising this information to determine if you want to expand or contract or open up new zones?
The analysis of the data is constant, really. It's something we're looking at, you heard, every month in the task force meetings. So we're looking at it all the time. I would say that we launched these zones in 2017, and then COVID happened. And as we all know, we backtracked. We were making great success. We really saw progress in 2019. And then in COVID, we backtracked. And so we don't see expanding now. We think we're in the right places based on the data. We added Harlem most recently because we saw from the data that community was experiencing a high burden of rat activity. But we are looking at this constantly.
Okay. So there's no specific threshold that an area would need to receive to trigger a zone, an expansion of the zone?
It's not a bright line rule, a threshold that you tip over. It is constantly looking at different factors.
Okay.
And if I could just add, I want to underscore that health and their services are available citywide, so inspections are happening everywhere, interventions are happening everywhere, not just in our rodent mitigation zone. So every New Yorker can rest assured that health is active, sanitation, our rat mitigation efforts are active in their communities. These are just designated zones we have an extra attention to.
Okay. Can you describe the specific interventions that other agencies such as Parks, DOE, and NYCHA are employing in the zones?
Yes, so all of those agencies are active members in our rat task force, and through that are employing integrated pest management. So across all agencies, we're looking at how waste is being managed and handled to reduce rat food sources. We're looking at exclusion techniques to remove harborage, so taking away active areas for rats to live, that's repairing cracks, looking at infrastructure, different ground coverings when we're thinking about plantings, and then extermination methods as our last piece. And across the agencies, we're pushing towards more use of non-poison extermination methods. So we're using carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, rat ice, which is another application of carbon dioxide, snap traps. NYCHA, in fact, has deployed snap traps with sensors to be more efficient in how they're deploying both equipment and staff to deal with hotspots when we're talking about rats.
Okay, and Local Law 108 of 2022 mandates that the Department of Health produce an annual rat mitigation report no later than November 1st. Can you provide an update on when we would expect to receive that?
We're close, and we'll have it to you soon.
What's that?
Sorry. We are close, so we'll have it to you soon.
Okay, as in by the end of the year, or?
I think we should have it by the end of the year.
Okay. Okay, what are some of the challenges for being in compliance with the timeline?
This was the first year of the report. The rat mitigation zones have, the codification of the rat mitigation law was new, and so we want to make sure that we're producing a report that will answer your questions and that will be a good model for the future.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Councilmember Ariola has joined us for this hearing. The Department of Health and Mental Health Environment and Health Data Portal shows that the 4 zones have high rates of failed compliance inspection. In the Bed-Stuy and Bushwick zone, it shows over 31,000 failed inspections, followed by 7,000 compliance inspections with a 63% failed compliance inspection. Why is the failure rate high?
So thank you for checking out the Environment and Health Data Portal. We encourage all New Yorkers to take a look. We make that work available to New Yorkers so everyone can track the progress that we together in New York City are making. That's right. Those failure rates are high in that neighborhood. And that's why we are focusing our attention there. So all of the work that you hear that we are doing together across the agencies is what we are confident will drive those failure rates down, drive the signs of rats down. We continue to do education with property owners about best practices and about their obligation to maintain their property free of rats.
Okay, I know Chair Shulman will dive into a little bit more of those, the particulars of that. I'm going to turn to curbside organics and waste containerization for a second. One of the key goals of the Zero Waste Act and the mandatory composting is to not only address the larger climate and environmental goals, but also to tackle the neighborhood rat issues by containerizing food waste. How many brown bins were distributed in Brooklyn in the lead up to the rollout of curbside organics collections?
Yeah, thank you. It was about 60,000 bin orders were placed. I don't have the dedupe number that were distributed, because it might be more than one from a single residence, but we were incredibly impressed by that 60,000 order number. It was substantially higher than the 40,000-ish in Queens, even though big chunks of Brooklyn already had brown bins from prior programs. So that was very exciting that there was more interest, and I think it really speaks to the success of the largest and easiest to use composting program ever.
Okay, so 60,000 were ordered, and you don't know how many went out the door?
I don't have it handy. I know we have the delivery number. I can get it to you.
Okay, can you see if you can grab
Sure.
that before here? Will DSNY continue to distribute brown bins as the curbside program rolls out to the other boroughs?
We've done it on a borough-by-borough rolling basis. Obviously, the PEG has impacts. You know, this is an incredibly challenging fiscal climate. We're developing those plans now.
Okay, so you're not sure if you'll be able to distribute brown bins?
I can tell you that we have been very impressed by the success of our brown bin distribution program, and that one of the innovations around this program is allowing people to use their own bins as well, but we're developing the rollout plans to get to the citywide rollout by October of next year.
Yeah, I think this is really important because of the specifically putting the food in a container, and it seems like from what we get from feedback is that those bins hold up, right? They're not fully being eaten through yet by the rats, and they're holding up for a while, so it would be really important to roll that out in places where you know, people are requesting that.
And if I may, regardless of what bin is used, under the rule that implements the law, the food waste must go in a bin with a secure lid.
That's right. But we want to make it as easy as possible for people to use the right thing, right? Okay, I know it might be too early. We weren't sure if this was a good, necessarily relevant question or if you'd be able to ask, but have there been any changes in rat complaints associated with the curbside organics program where we've seen it implemented?
Yes, give me just a second. So rat complaints are not tracked specifically relative to the curbside organics program. Obviously, from the time the rule changes took effect and the containerization rules were implemented, as you cited in your testimony, that there was a 45% decrease of rat sightings in the rat mitigation zones, 20% decrease citywide. We're hopeful that that trend is going to continue as curbside composting comes citywide.
Okay. With regards to containerization, there's just been a string of announcements. I know you, justfully characterize it as your fronts on trash, your trash
The
revolution.
trash revolution.
Yeah, okay. These include, let's just go through them. These include new set-out time containerization requirements effective April 1st, food-related business containerization effective July 30th, chain business containerization effective September 5th, with more upcoming, including all business containerization by March 1st, 2024, and all buildings with fewer than 9 units by fall 2024. This is a lot of changes going on, and I remember when we were pushing for the curbside organics rollout, there was a lot of pushback saying it was too complicated. And then there's a string of announcements around trash, set-out times, and containers immediately after with very short enforcement times. So how, and given the peg to the outreach and communications, which I do have additional questions on, how does DSNY expect to effectively communicate all of these new requirements as the agency cuts outreach funding while New Yorkers are still adjusting to this long list of new rules?
So I'll speak to the outreach component, and then First Deputy Commissioner Lohan can speak to it from the operational side. Say that outreach around these rules is very important to us. The main thing I'll say about it first, before I get into some of the specifics, is I don't think there's anything complicated about saying your trash goes in a bin. Right? It doesn't go on the street anymore. New York's the only place in the world left that does that. How about we do what works for everybody else, and instead of putting it right on our public sidewalks that belong to all of us, it goes into a bin that the rats can't get into. We are engaged in substantial outreach around this now and being thoughtful about the city's fiscal crisis. For example, around the expansion of the containerization rules for businesses to all businesses, we're working with the NYPD Community Affairs Unit, who are distributing leaflets to all 200,000 businesses in the city about this. So we're trying to be creative and thoughtful, but also every single one of these rules has come with a 1-month warning period. And during that warning period, that's not a fake on-paper warning period. We're out writing tens of thousands of warnings every time to make sure that no one can say that they didn't know about this very basic requirement to get your trash off of our sidewalks and into a bin.
And separately from that, we have our supervisors that are in the field nightly. We have supervisors around the clock, sanitation enforcement agents that go out. And again, like Deputy Commissioner Goodman said, we've issued warnings for the 1-month period with, obviously communicating with the businesses and residents that have any questions that come with it. So.
Okay, so beyond the NYPD's outreach unit, which doesn't always work for different types of businesses. You might have immigrant-owned businesses or different businesses who that alarms them when that kind of outreach comes their way. Who else are you working with to do effective outreach?
There's, be it every relevant community board before the rule is implemented. We're holding info sessions. Our in-house outreach communications team is having info sessions for all relevant businesses, spoken to key industry groups, and really making sure that everybody knows about this. Be happy to work with you on additional outreach opportunities too, if there's anything specific to this communities in your district.
That would be great. So for the outer boroughs or less dense residential areas, I've really been struggling to understand the new set-out times with the caveat of the 6 p.m. or no, 8 p.m. without a bin. As a real rat mitigation strategy, I understand it from an aesthetic point of view, from the sidewalks not having the mountains, but there's a lot, if you go to some of the outer neighborhoods around 6 o'clock or even 4 o'clock, you'll have at 4 o'clock, the supers putting the mountain of trash that just taking out of the containers and preparing it at 4 o'clock, it sits in a mountain just on the other side of the sidewalk. And then at 8 o'clock, that 4 o'clock mountain goes to the 8 o'clock mountain in front of the sidewalk. So I'm just trying to understand that. I know that you mentioned changing some of the workforce to do the night shifts, but what is are those routes in some of those areas, or is this mostly in the Manhattan area?
It has substantial overlap with the 4 rat mitigation zones. That's where we've emphasized more overnight collection. I'll also say that 2 things about the specific situation you're describing. The first is that it will be resolved this coming fall when all 1 to 9 unit buildings have to use containers for their waste set out. So the set out times was sort of the leveling, a sweeping away of this old mistake of the Lindsay administration of letting the plastic bags go right on the sidewalk. It's a big undertaking, right, to get that done. It's, 50 or 60 years of inertia. Changing the set out times was the first step, and it put us in a place where the city was on an even playing field and the additional plays in the Future of Trash playbook could be enacted. So does reducing that time, I hear the jokes all the time of people go, oh, but rats are nocturnal anyway. I think it's sort of self-evident that if the trash was out for 32 hours and now it's out for 4 hours, yeah, rats are out at night, but they have less time to get to the trash if it's
but
only
the
out
trash is not being picked up at 8 o'clock. It's not being picked up at 9 o'clock.
If it's set out at 8 p.m. and in a rat mitigation zone picked up at midnight,
Right,
that's 4 hours.
I'm talking about, so outside of the rat mitigation zones, we appreciate and understand what you're saying in the rat mitigation zones as areas needing extra and ordinary attention. But outside of that, there's not, most people would say there's not much of a difference being done.
I would dispute that. I think that if it's set out at 8 p.m. or 6 p.m. in a container, which is even better, and then collected outside a rat mitigation zone at 6 a.m., as opposed to possibly being left until 4 p.m. or the end of the 4 p.m. shift, as used to be the case for up to 20% of the trash, that's a major operational change. So I think it's important to understand that the set-out time rule asked New Yorkers to change, and we changed as well. The time that the trash was out went like this from both sides.
Okay, so
and that makes them
just to clarify, because I want to make sure I'm clear. If I'm in Brooklyn 5, Garage 5 district,
Yep.
and I put my trash in bags out at 8 o'clock, what time does it get picked up?
Depending on exactly where you are, it might be.
I'm
and
in
what time
Garage
of year.
5.
No, but depending on where, as you know, Brooklyn 5 is an enormous
It's
community.
huge, but I don't believe any of it has a rat mitigation zone.
That's even so. Parts of it will receive midnight collection at parts of the year, and the rest of it will receive 6 a.m. collection. There used to be some collection, about 20%, left all the way until 4 p.m. the next day. We eliminated that entirely. So now, just using Brooklyn 5 as an example, all of the collection will be either at midnight or at 6 a.m.
Okay.
And can I just add to that, about 20% or more in all districts citywide have that midnight collection. And then when we're not in our winter operations, we've shifted most of our daytime collections to start at 5 a.m. So it allows our crews to get through the streets, navigate quicker. So you should see a lot of that refuse off the street quicker, and virtually very little is on the 4 p.m. shift.
So just to reconfirm what you just said to me, in every district, 20% of the pickups will happen in that night shift.
Correct. It varies from district to district, but that's about the average.
Okay. Is there a way that we can understand a little bit more where that's happening? I think that would be really helpful information for members to know, and the public to know what time or my trash is on a night shift or not.
Sure, we can get you that information broken out.
That would be really helpful.
If that's helpful.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward. I recognize Councilmember Gail Brewer and Gennaro and Narcisse have joined us. Do you have any initial data on either residential or commercial containerization enforcement, including the number of inspections or fines?
Sure. So beginning with the set-out rule violations for residential and businesses, we started a warning period in April, and we issued 24,510 warnings. And then beginning May 1st, we started a violation period, which to date, we've issued 59,324 violations. On food-related businesses violations, we had a warning period for a month, which was in August. 22,313 warnings were issued, and then the violation period, which started on September 1st to date, 3,323 violations. And then on the chain businesses, the warning period began September 5th, ran for a month, 5,561 warnings, and then since October 5th, we've issued 211 violations.
Okay. I just have one more question in this topic around the bin, the New York City bin that you all put out the RFP for. How is this bin going to be different than anyone's currently in the market?
Well, there's a few ways in which it'll be different. Now, obviously, the RFP process is going on now, and I don't want to say anything that'll prejudice the procurement, how that can be, but I will say a couple of things about it. The first thing about it is it's going to be by far the cheapest bin available on the market. We're using a concession model where we're able to guarantee to the awardee, hey, because this bin will be mandated and you'll be the only one who can sell it, we know the volume will be approximately 3.2 million bins sold. So therefore, we're saying the price has to be about this. We did a lot of research about what these bins cost off the shelf at if you went to a store now to buy one. The price points that we're talking about are far lower. This will be the cheapest bin available, and by a significant amount. So that's the first thing. This will be a cheaper bin to use. The other thing is, by having them all uniform, and again, I don't want to prejudice the procurement, so I'm not going to say in what way they will be uniform. I'm not going to say where the handle, et cetera, things like that. Just say that by having them all uniform, we can optimize for mechanized collection, put tippers on the back of the truck so that they're all the same.
Okay, but so it's really more for logistics of routes rather than, is it going to be any more rodent-proof than what's out there?
Those are
It's
the
just
kinds of things we're looking at in
uniformity and
procurement.
useful for the route.
Yeah. Well, no, I wouldn't say it's just uniformity. I would say uniformity is the only thing I can speak to now without prejudicing the procurement. We are looking at the kinds of things you're describing and going to take the bids as they come in.
And you're saying it will be cheaper than anything out on the market comparable?
Yes.
Okay. All right, just a few more questions. Just a few questions related to the November plan. DSNY is cutting significant portions of its outreach and communication contracts. For example, curbside composting outreach and other outreach funding will be cut by about $4.1 million in FY24, $2.4 million in FY25. And how are you all currently making decisions about which outreach programs to prioritize considering these cuts?
Yeah, this is, as you know, I don't have to tell this group what an incredible fiscal crisis this is and how difficult these decisions have been. I can say at this point, as we're developing this plan, that curbside composting is profoundly important to all of us. And the whole idea behind the design of the program was you need a curbside composting program people will actually use. We are very aware that people will not use the program if they don't know about it. So what the outreach looks like, how much we can do with existing resources, what's frozen, what's cut, what's delayed, that's all information now. But I really do just want to emphasize that we're not going to run this program knowing that people don't know about it, knowing that people aren't going to participate. The idea is to educate all 8.5 million New Yorkers about the fact that they have access to an incredible new service, the easiest, largest curbside composting program in the country's history.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious about the prioritization because you got a lot of things going on. You've got
good thing we have a great team.
To y'all's credit, you've got commercial waste zones coming online. You've got rollout of 3 new boroughs next year. You've got a string of set out times, a new bin, a new this, a new that. So how are you going to prioritize effectively communicating all these programs with so much being cut off?
I'm not sure if you'll consider this a satisfying answer, but I'll tell you my thinking about it is I just always go back to something that Commissioner Tisch once told me, which is I don't do dropped balls. And that's sort of it. We got a lot of balls in the air on this, and we're going to get it done because it's important.
Okay, not a satisfying answer, but I'll take it. So thank you for
But we're very fortunate
that.
to have a lot of action.
No, I'm just looking at the list of stuff you all have rolled out, and I'm like, you're cutting a bunch of money. I see DSNY just received the $2 million grant from EPA for recycling education and outreach. I'm wondering how this grant can support community composting groups that are laying off 100 people in the next 2 weeks.
Well, the grant is going to be used for compost education and outreach as part of the rollout of the remaining 3 boroughs. Specifics to come. I know we're still working with the EPA grant management team to determine exactly what it can be used on.
Okay, when does that funding hit the ground?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure if I have that here. I believe that it's the next 2 fiscal years is when it's accessible, but I'm not sure when it comes in. but I believe it must be used over the next 2 fiscal years. I think we should double check that. I apologize.
Okay. I just have a few more questions about on this line, and then I have a couple questions for the Rat Czar. And then I'll kick it over to Chair Schulman because I know a lot of people have questions. We're in the weeds. Local Law 89 of 2023 required DSNY to establish 30 organic waste drop-off sites in consultation with local organizations by April 1st, 2024. Can you give any specific dates that you have had consultation with local organizations and what organizations those were?
So, as you mentioned, local law requires full compliance by April 1st. We will be in touch with everything ahead of that deadline. I can share something exciting. I'm just going to pull it up here.
Okay.
You may know we have a network of about 400 compost drop-off sites across the city, accessible by the NYC Compost app, which is available for both iOS and Android.
Yes.
So I understand that the law has a few additional reporting requirements, and we will make sure those are done by April 1st.
Yeah, those are 400 sites. Those are DSNY funded sites, all 400?
Yes, these are the 400 smart composting bins.
Okay.
They're accessible 24/7, and unlike many community composting sites, which are only open a few hours a week, these also take meat and dairy. So anything from your kitchen, anything from your garden, we really encourage all neighbors to use them.
We totally appreciate the smart bins. We also really, really value our community composting drop-off sites where people can learn, people can get educated on what they're doing, people can see what's happening, whether or not they've ever heard of it before. They can pass by it and ask some questions and figure it out. I personally don't think the smart bins are a good substitute for those programs. But I do want to know how you assess where these smart bins get placed.
So the main things that I'll say about how they were placed is that they are in all 5 boroughs. They are in communities beyond the top 7 districts from the city's legacy composting program. It was very important to provide equity around the placement of these bins. They were added to many neighborhoods that never had easy access to compost collection, either curbside or through community sites. They were co-located in many neighborhoods by schools. The thought process there was the school is often the central hub of the community. It's a place that people pass by regularly. You know, if you go to the school, you can take your compost on your way in. Right? They are accessible 24/7, and they take any food scrap. So they were co-located in central locations in all boroughs, particularly with an emphasis on getting beyond the truest of the true believers.
Okay, I have just a few questions for the Rat Czar, and then I'm going to pass it over to Chair Schulman. Earlier this year, Mayor Adams appointed you. Can you explain what you do in detail? What does your day look like? What are the specific deliverables for you? Are there targets that you are scheduled to hit? How are you measuring success? Just kind of tell us a little bit about what specifically you do.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'll start by saying I'm honored and privileged to serve in this role for the City of New York. I think it's an issue there's great alignment on. No one wants to live in a city full of rats. You shared that at the top, and there's been a groundswell of support to get this done. So much of my day-to-day is working on building coalition and accountability and uncovering with agencies, areas of need, areas that need to build efficiencies. So I report into the Chief of Staff, and the idea behind there is to make sure that questions, concerns, challenges are brought directly to the mayor, to make sure that this is a high-level priority for him, to make sure policies are identified and implemented. In terms of target and success, we're looking at a lot of the issues that Corinne shared that we use as metrics across the city. So we're looking at failure rates in our road mitigation zones. We're looking at public versus private properties. We're looking at compliance and initial inspection. What are those differences? And to underscore, initial inspection is the first inspection health does. Compliance is their second follow-up inspection. Really the impact on everyday New Yorkers. I think what you heard in testimony and from my colleagues here, this is interjurisdictional. The many facets that come into play when we're talking about integrated pest management and citywide application require someone sitting at the helm, making sure we have direction, organization, and collective accountability.
So the real measuring metric of success is what I heard, and maybe I missed something, failure rates and compliance.
Yes, and I'd say impact on New Yorkers, so measured in a number of different ways, impact in the community, either through 311 complaints, education. I know many of the folks sitting up on the dais today have been on visits with, really a conduit of information back from New Yorkers to the administration, and then city programs and policies back out to our New Yorkers as well.
I heard in your testimony you said you've been developing site-specific IPMs. How is that coming together in terms of from where you're sitting across all the agencies? Is there like a strategic plan that we would be able to look at for how we're addressing rats?
Yeah, so a lot of the strategy was laid out in the testimony, again, really drilling down on our integrated pest management citywide. And the piloting we did since my appointment was working with our core agencies in our rodent mitigation zone, that's health, parks, public schools, and NYCHA, to really dig into identifying some sites where we can really go deeper on that integrated pest management strategy. So piloting, see what kind of resources need, see those success, see how we can collaborate better and identify challenges, and then see if there are scaled solutions.
And those sites are public facilities?
Yes, all of those sites are publicly managed properties, and all of them were in our rodent mitigation zones, which is available. You can see those shape files on Health's website.
Okay. I'm going to pass it over to Chair Shulman. Thank you.
Hi, before I go, I'm actually going to concede to Councilmember Hudson, who has to leave, so she's going to ask her questions, and then I have a bunch.
Thank you so much to both chairs. During my 2 years in office, there have been a few issues more pressing for constituents than rats. Because of the number of complaints we received, we formed a District 35 rat task force to organize our constituents, share best practices, and advocate for improvements. And the committee will hear from some of those members later today, and I just want to thank Rocco and Andy for being here today. One issue my staff and I have faced is the administrative runaround and finger pointing as to who is responsible for abatement in various areas. So I have just a couple of simple questions. The first is, which city agency is responsible for mitigating rat burrows in tree pits?
Thank you, Councilmember Hudson. It was a pleasure to meet with your district's rat task force. They're very engaged and have been a great source of conversation with me as I've taken on this role, so appreciate your leadership there. Rats can make their home in tree pits if there's a food source nearby. Health can conduct emergency baiting in tree pits, but if the underlying food sources and conditions that attract rats are not addressed, the rats will repopulate. It is the responsibility of property owners to make sure their tree pits and sidewalks are free of debris and litter, including 18 inches out into the street, and that primarily serves as the food source for the rats living in tree pits.
So in what circumstances will the agency abate burrows in tree pits, so DOHMH in this case?
So there's a number of factors that go into how health is able to deploy their resources for emergency, again, I'll underscore emergency treatment, but it really comes down to if those other factors are addressed, if we're going to be able to see progress.
Okay, and which city is responsible for abating rat burrows under sidewalks?
So sidewalks are the responsibility of the property owner, and health will issue violations if there are condition conducive or active rat signs on our sidewalks. There is a stoppage team out of health that supports with sidewalk work in our public realm. Okay.
It's a little confusing, I think, for the average New Yorker to understand, 18 inches and sort of, to the chair's point, a lot of different messaging around this stuff. So I think if there's any way to streamline some of that information and the messaging and communication specifically around who's responsible for what, whether it's small businesses, property owners, agencies, that would be helpful. And I want to echo your sentiment from my end that you've been incredibly helpful and a great resource to my team and also to the district. And so with the creation of the rat reduction task force, if I may, thank you. With the creation of the rat reduction task force and the hiring of your role, the city has shown its commitment to agency coordination around rodent mitigation. How will this commitment be maintained with the announced budget cuts?
So the nature of the position I serve in is to build efficiencies in existing structures. So working with my colleagues here or other agencies, a lot of these systems we have in place are standard operating procedures, and we continue to push on them, drive efficiency, better strategy. You heard some of our numbers out of health, 220,000 inspections. We're getting better and better identifying where our high area of needs are, make sure we're deploying resources appropriately, and better coordination leads to better communication, and that's the commitment you have from me in this administration.
Great. And Chair, if I may have one last question. Thank you. So I pass by a police precinct in my district almost daily, and on the nights before trash collection days, there are over a dozen trash bags out on the sidewalk, which are very neatly placed, I may add. But I'm wondering when the city is going to require its own agencies and its own buildings to put trash in bins the way we're requiring everybody else.
So I'll start by saying, I listed some of the agencies that work in our rat task force. We're always expanding that group to make sure through integrated pest management, we have integrated representation, including representatives from NYPD, FDNY, DCAS, making sure there's true cohesion across city operations. So that is the benefit of having someone in a role like I sit. I can truly take the horizon line approach to make sure everyone is part of the conversation, but I'll defer to sanitation around the waste collection.
Thank you.
And Councilmember, I'll say that the question you posed, when will this requirement cover city-owned property, is something that comes up in our meetings regularly. We're very interested in making sure that all the trash is off the streets. So we do have the pilot for schools, which are the sort of public facilities that produce the largest volume of trash. We're excited about the results of that pilot so far. As far as other buildings like a police precinct being an interesting example, and I'd be curious to know the number because we'd be happy to talk to them. We do have a team, the Technical Assistance and Training Unit of the Department of Sanitation, whose job it is to work with institutional actors, for example, schools, NYCHA, any other building like that. And we conduct regular trainings, meetings, site visits, making sure that these sorts of large institutional facilities are handling their waste in accordance with the rules. As far as when the rule will be expanded to cover city-owned property, it's an open question, but we're very clear that the goal is to get every single one of these bags off the street.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you again to the chairs for your time.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions. So one is, when you talked about the rat mitigation zones, and I know that there's the statistics that go into selecting them, all of that stuff. Being a representative from Queens, I'm not feeling the love because we don't have any rat mitigation zones in Queens, but we do have rats. And, you know, even though our rat issues may not be the same as other parts of the city, I think that it would be helpful. So I just wanted to ask if there's any consideration for expanding them into some other areas that might not be as much of an emergent issue than others.
So I think Deputy Commissioner Schiff answered that. You know, we're looking at the zones now. We feel like we're in the right place based on the information we have. But I'll underscore again, we have resources to work citywide. So if there are areas of concern out of your office, from your constituents, let's connect over them, and we can work both collectively. How do we engage your constituents on education? Again, private property owners are the responsible party for rats or conditions conducive on their property. We work interagency if there are public properties that are contributing to rat populations, but we can have health inspectors come out, give that trained eye to where we see our issues, and work collectively to address them in Queens and in all of the boroughs.
I appreciate that, and I will add that you were supposed to come out to my district, and that was the day we had 3 inches of rain, so you couldn't. But we are going to reschedule that, so we're looking forward to that. I do also have a question in terms of the fines from sanitation. So it was said earlier there were about some 59,000 and some other violations that were issued after the warning period. So my question is, how much do those fines add up to monetarily? And the reason I'm asking that question is because, you know, there has been some statements about the fact that the city is not collecting the fines that people are incurring or businesses are incurring. I think Councilmember Brewer had pointed that out a while back, like $2 billion in fines that are not. So I'm asking, because now that we're facing some cuts and everything else in the November plan, I want to know if these are being collected. I want to know how much they add up to approximately. You don't have to give me the exact number, and if they're being collected.
So the first violation is $50, the second violation is $100, and the third violation is $200.
Right.
We have to work with oath just to see, you know, if they're being adjudicated and being paid. That's something we have to work with.
Can you gather that and get back to us? Because this is the time not to sort of let these things slide. And I have, you know, I will tell you, I represent Forest Hills, Kew Gardens, and Richmond Hill. So in Forest Hills, you know, we have some chain stores that they regularly don't pick up their garbage and they don't do a lot of stuff, and those are the folks that I really want to hold accountable to particularly. So we really should take a look at that and keep on top of that. So if you can get back to us, that would be good.
Definitely do that.
Okay. In terms of the composting, my understanding is that in areas, and I know you went over this a little bit with Chair Nurse, where you have composting that helps to reduce the rat population, is that true?
Well, we certainly think so. You know,
Okay.
it's not something that we've been able to track specifically related to composting, but it stands to reason that everything that we eat, rats eat, right? All human food is rat food. And right now, all of the human food that becomes rat food in places that don't have composting, it's in every one of the trash bags. Every single one of the black bags has some rat food in it. They all want to get into those bags and get the food. But instead, you take it out of the black bags and put it in a separate, secure container, and it's just all in one place that they can't get into. That will reduce their access to the food.
So now, Grow NYC, is that part of sanitation? Is that, what does that come out
Outside
of?
community composter funded in part by the department.
So, and that's a program that I understand is going to have a problem now that the composting, is that because of a grant? I just want to understand the particulars of that.
Yeah, was a part of the PEG, and I can tell you specifically that about 10% of the city's composting budget was cut as part of the PEG. Right? The city's total composting budget, which includes curbside and the smart bins and the community composters, about 10% of it was eliminated. And the PEG will eliminate all city funding for community composting programs across the city. And there's no specific loss of DSNY head count related to that.
Right, but those kinds of programs, I mean, I just want to point out, I understand the issue in terms of the budget and everything else is that neighborhood folks go to these programs. I mean, I see it because there's a Grow NYC, a Green Market, like 2 blocks from where I live. And I go there every Sunday and I see the composting that's done, and it's a lot of it. So, you know, I just want to make a point that I don't want to, like, throw out the baby with the bathwater here, that we need to take a look at that kind of stuff. And there are jobs, I understand, that are being lost because of that. That's what I was bringing up. Maybe not something for you to respond to, but I was told there was a grant that was, like, going away, and I just don't know what the grant
I'm not
was.
sure. I think it's just PEG related.
It's just PEG related? Okay, fine. So, let's see. Oh, when you talked about the bins being the cheapest ones, the ones that we're going to have all over the place, I understand that they're cheap, but I want to know what they're going to look like, because we don't want to have ones that are aesthetically, like, not.
Aesthetics are actually one of the things written specifically into the
Okay.
RFP. We can judge respondents based on the look and feel of their bins. Our hope, if I can really just
Yeah,
put in
please.
a plug for this program,
Please.
is that the official NYC bin is going to become an icon of the city, that people are going to
Okay.
look at this and go, right now they look at the city and they go, oh yeah, New York, that's the place with the big bags of trash, right? And instead they're going to say, oh yeah, New York, that's the place with the beautiful individual wheeled bins for all residences with 9 or fewer units.
Now, as part of the PEGs or the November mod, we're going to lose some trash bins, is that correct? Like the regular trash bins?
Yeah, so the corner litter baskets.
Right.
The PEG does include a 40% reduction in litter basket service. Now, if I can speak to what I have to say I think is a really smart management strategy given an incredibly challenging fiscal crisis. In the past, litter basket service, it goes up, it goes down, it's funded, it's, stuff happens at exec, stuff happens at adopted, all the plans, it goes up and goes down. When it went down in the past, baskets would overflow. You would see the change right away, because you would see the baskets are getting emptied less often, and now they're overflowing. Instead, in the face of this fiscal crisis, we are not going to let any individual basket be emptied less often, because all that does is invite the rats, right? When the basket is overflowing. So instead, we are going to remove litter baskets. And instead of there being an overflowing basket on that corner, there will simply be no basket on that corner, nothing to attract the rats.
All right, I have some differing opinions on that, but, because the average person, if they're looking for it, then they're going to throw it in the street. And I have, depending on where you're talking about, so I just, at some point, I want to know how you're going to determine where those are going to be.
We're in the process now. I don't want to get ahead of a public plan, but
I
I
get
can
it,
say that we're being very thoughtful about exactly the situation.
I just want to raise it here, but yeah. Okay, so now my question, hold on one second. Give me a sec. Okay, how many DOH, MH personnel are working on rat mitigation?
We have about 45 inspectors who are out doing the inspectional work. We have many, many more people across the agency working on pest control issues.
What is the agency cost for these positions?
I don't have budget numbers with me. We can get back to you about that.
Please. How many people are deployed for rat mitigation zones?
Our inspectors work city-wide. We do have some staff who are who specifically focus on rat mitigation zones. I don't have those breakdowns, but we can get back to you.
How does DOHMH work outside of rat mitigation zones?
So as we've been saying, our program is citywide, and because we do have such extensive data about rat activity around the city, that means that we can calibrate the approach to the neighborhood level conditions. So as we've been saying, the rat burden in the rat mitigation zones, those are the areas with the highest rat burden, and so that's the area where we have the most intensive multi-agency response. But we work everywhere. We have done indexing in many, many parts of the city. We respond to complaints throughout the city. So really the approach matches the burden of rats.
Okay, education, as we've talked about, is an important part of tackling the rat issue. How many Rat Academy training sessions are held annually for both the general community and for pest control professionals?
So this, in the first half of 2023, we had 20 Rat Academies. These are very, very popular. I'm looking around the room. I think we've held them with all of you. We've trained hundreds, thousands of New Yorkers, about 850 in the first 6 months of this year. We've worked with many of your colleagues and other sponsors as well, BIDS, community groups, block associations. They're so popular, New Yorkers love them, and it's so important, as we've been talking about, because we're all in this together. So it's so important that all of us, New Yorkers, property managers, know best practices for controlling rats.
Do you have the capacity to expand on doing the Rat Academies?
We do. We want to hear from you and constituent groups in your neighborhoods. Be in touch with us. I think you all know how to reach us. We're happy to set those up. We can offer them. We've done them on the weekends. We can do them in the evenings. We can do them during the day. We want this to be convenient for you. So please be in touch with us. It's such an important part of our program.
Is there a way to put these trainings online for people to do on their own time?
So let me take that back. I mean, it's really, it's an experience that we want to be there with New Yorkers and answer their questions. We give out a trash bin at the end, which is a very popular part of the program. So let me take that back, but there's pros and cons to the different approaches.
Do you have them in different languages?
We have offered them in Spanish, and we can offer them in different languages.
This summer, the city held its first anti-rat day of action in Harlem with the new rat czar. What activities are involved in an anti-rat day of action?
A great title that rolls off the tongue, right? Get people talking about rats and what you can do, what actions you can take. So we had our first one in Harlem in August. We hosted one in the Bronx in September, and then in Queens in October. And at the Anti-Rat Day of Actions, it's really about bringing city services to communities, to New Yorkers, to show them what action we can take together and what power's in their hands. So we had representation from Department of Sanitation, their education unit, training on waste set-out, waste compliance, and also our community tool clean rental program, loan program, where communities can request tools to do a litter collection day on their block. We had New York City Park tree stewardship team there to talk about tree stewardship and making sure your tree pits are not only litter free, but better for the trees and less conducive to rats. And then we had Department of Health and Mental Hygiene there. Again, their education team, the folks who lead the Rat Academy, to do some direct engagement, and the stoppage team who deploys different methods of integrated pest management, doing demonstrations of burrow collapsing, burrow RX machine use, really, again, engaging New Yorkers with what they can and should be doing on their properties and their blocks to see an impact.
And any of us can call and say, we'd like to do something like this, and...
Yeah, all of these services, the whole idea of this, these are existing city services that are available to New Yorkers, to community groups. So if there's interest in building a coalition, getting some excitement about rats or excitement to get rats out, let's connect and we can talk about how we connect those services.
I just had one follow-up question on this. Is there any prerequisite to having a day of action? I think our office had reached out and it said, oh, we have to have Rat Academy trainings, and we said we've had them, we've had a dozen of them or so. So what would be any pre-work that somebody would need to do to request something like this?
So we worked with different community groups. So we worked with the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit to help identify partners. The whole goal, we worked with a tenants association in Harlem, we worked with a community garden in the Bronx and a BID in Queens. So we're looking to connect with groups who are gonna kind of sustain ownership here. No pre-qualifications. The only piece I'll underscore is these are available services. I think the coordination around them is very powerful. So if there's interest, let's connect and talk about how we bring that to your district.
Does the city have any resources to disperse to building owners for the purposes of rat mitigation techniques, like funds to assist with installing an odorless trash compactor?
So there are a wealth of resources available to New Yorkers. I think a lot of them we've underscored today around education and I'll say case management support. So health has a plethora of resources on nyc.gov/rats. That's checklists, toolkits, managing pests on your property information, both for individual owners or to have conversations with your property managers. The other piece that I'll underscore is the piece Josh spoke about when we're talking about this concession agreement coming down the pike around securing the lowest price trash can for all New Yorkers going forward.
There are programs that some of the other agencies have where they'll go to a building and meet with the building owners and walk through and say, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, is that something that you would be able to do in terms of mitigating rats?
Absolutely. I'm happy to join anyone at any time on walkthroughs, both from an education and collective community consciousness standpoint. I'll also share that health inspectors do that work when they're at a site. These are scientifically trained inspectors who are identifying the issues either that are attracting rats or showing where the rat activity is. So we already have that 45 inspectors, 220,000 inspections this year. So that education is already happening. We also partner very closely with HPD if there are buildings that we think need, joint agency intervention.
Now, what do you do? I know you talked about construction, but what do you do about abandoned properties, like abandoned commercial properties, where I get in my office, there's one that's been closed for like almost 2 years now, and it used to be a restaurant, and they see rats inside and all that. So how do you work with that?
So we do the same process of an inspection, and if rat activity or conditions conducive are found, a second inspection is done via the health department. Escalations can happen past that if we're not seeing mitigation efforts by the property owners.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Now I want to go, just a few questions to DOHMH about rat, illnesses and things like that. Can you, go over what the issues are in terms of rats spreading disease and rats, rat bites causing all kinds of issues? So can you, just give a summary or give us a little information about that?
Yes, sure. And you mentioned the illness that we monitor and are concerned about is called leptospirosis. I want everyone to know it is very, very rare. It is rare for us. We see fewer than a couple dozen cases a year. So out of a city of 8.5 million people, this is very unusual. It's a disease that is transmitted by contact with rat urine. So that is and from a rat that is infected by leptospirosis. So it's very unusual, but it is reportable to the health department, and we do monitor cases. We're also concerned about rat droppings contaminating food, and that's why that is inspection for pests and pest conditions is a part of our restaurant inspection. So that's really what we think about in terms of disease and rats.
Okay, and one of the other questions I have, do you know how many rats there are? I know that's a difficult question, but...
So we do not have a rat census. The information that we use to drive our, collective strategy is the information our health inspectors collect. Again, I'll underscore, these are folks coming with a scientific, they're trained. It's a very reliable metric to understand where our rats are, and then where we need to dedicate resources, either city resources or work with our private property owners to address those issues.
So I want to ask the Department of Buildings what you do about construction sites.
Good morning, Gus Financhik, First Deputy Commissioner. Yes, we're participating in a rat task force, but most notable is implementation of Local Law 119 of 22, which become a prominent feature in our building code, which I consider the most important section of the code and the largest section of the code, safety during construction. And with implementation of this local law, owners, applicants, and permit holders supposed to identify at time of filing for permit if construction involved over 50% of the area, if demolition involved over 50% of the area of the building, or if the building undergoing extension, vertical or horizontal, which constitute 25% of the building floor area. And with that, if any of those questions answered yes, the permit holder at the time of permit request supposed to submit to us certification from licensed exterminator stating that the site was treated for rodent extermination was performed, and providing this form submitted to us, provided this certification is submitted to us, permit will be issued. In addition to that, on a construction site where full demolition is scheduled, we must see the form from exterminator, which certify, not just certify, but stating the fact that extermination was done.
Do you do any inspections yourself? Because I know that's self-affirmation. Do you do any independent inspections from DOB?
Yes, and that's absolutely correct question to ask. Yes, we do inspection, and although our inspectors not specifically looking for the rats, but there are multiple factors which generate conditions which lead to rats appearance. And with that, inspectors are obviously looking, when inspecting 1,100,000 our existing buildings, looking for openings, especially openings at the ground level, looking for structural hollowness of the building, seeing for any openings. In addition, our building code was amended with section which required protection openings for utility pipes at the ground level, flood protection, flood openings. So it's and also our section of the safety section was greatly expanded, not with just local law 109 of 22, with requirements for housekeeping, which which is supposed to be enforced by multiple professionals working on construction sites.
How many inspectors do you have, and also are the inspectors going to be affected by the PEGs?
Total number of inspector, we have 543, I believe that's correct number. Out of what, 543 inspectors, about 160 of them is dedicated to safety in construction sites. Inspectors is dedicated to safety, and they're not going to be subject to PEG.
They aren't, okay. I just want to ask a couple more questions and then hand it over to my colleagues. One is New York City parks, because parks have a lot of rats and they have burrow holes and things like that. So how is that dealt with?
Parks are, I speak to them quite often. They're part of our task force. They're active participants in our rodent mitigation zone and citywide efforts. They have an excellent team of trained professionals, both extermination and then integrating, again, the strategies we know that keep long-term sustained reduction, so looking at harborage, looking at waste management. Parks are an area Corinne underscored that can be conducive to rats, because rats are evolved to burrow into soil. That's their preferred habitat. But parks is an active participant. They deploy a lot of alternative to pesticide use, including the use of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide during nesting raptor season to make sure we're not seeing secondary effects to those animals. So they're on board and excellent partners for us.
So the,
Can I add one question to that?
go ahead. And then I have one more. Go ahead.
Just because we were touched on parks, I just wanted to have a question, because I think we all know how woefully underfunded they are in their ability to do maintenance. I mean, I have staff members calling parks begging them to cut the grass because it's knee high, right? And these are opportunities where rodents get in. So from your perspective, because it's unique, what resources do these agencies need, specifically parks? Like, what does parks need to be able to do effective rat mitigation?
So all effective rat mitigation comes down to routinized sanitation, so cleaning and removal of harborage conditions. So across all agencies, that's what we need to get this done, the folks and the knowledge there to execute on a standardized basis.
Is it your opinion that parks needs more workers to do that job?
I think when we're thinking about something as interjurisdictional as rats, it's important to look across the whole portfolio of, where we have holes and where they could be filled. I think every agency would come to the table and say, absolutely, we can use more staff to get this done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so before I ask my last question, I want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Farias and Councilmember Salamanca. So my question, maybe it's either DOB or DOHMH or a combination. So with buildings that have food stores underneath on the ground floor, how do you deal with that in terms, because my experience has been in those food establishments and they have a basement, and very often the basement has rats in it. How do you deal with that?
So just to clarify, you're talking about mixed-use buildings where there's a food establishment on the ground floor and then apartments above?
Apartments above and like a supermarket underneath, or
So
a food store. Or what,
The same, and Corinne, I'll pass to you next. The same health code applies to even mixed-use buildings. So if health department inspectors externally are seeing, again, conditions conducive or active rat signs, they will issue first a commissioner's letter to abate, and then subsequent violations if they're found.
Okay, thank you. That'll conclude. I may come back later, but that concludes my questions for now. Thank you so much.
So next we have Councilmember Sean Abreu.
Thank you, Chairs Nurse and Shulman, for this very important hearing. My first set of questions are for DOHMH. So in my district, we've been getting a lot of support from the rat mitigation zones. We're very excited about that. But there have been, things that I do have questions about. Just saw recently in my colleague's district, Julie Menon's district, she did an amazing job in bringing an exterminator to a district, which made a huge difference. I'm curious to know how many city employees, exterminators there are that DOHMH has on the street on a typical day.
So as we've been detailing, the program at the health department is to enforce the health code, which requires property owners to keep their properties free of pests. When we find rats and conditions conducive to rats, we will order the property owner to make corrections, including by hiring a licensed pest control professional. The health department does have some exterminators on staff that we.
How many?
I don't have that number, but I can tell you that in fiscal '23, we conducted 46,000 exterminations. So we have extermination staff. We really use those staff for emergencies. For when the property owner doesn't follow our order, we will conduct that extermination and then bill the property owner. But the model is that property owners are responsible for maintaining their properties free of pests, and so we direct them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a crisis right now when it comes to the rat population. There are a lot of tree burrows that need a lot of that support from an extermination standpoint. I would like to know the exact number of exterminators. I know you said some, but we have millions of rats in New York City, and I know we didn't do a census, but I just know it by walking down the street. DSNY has done a lot in my district, and I know that after containerization, right, after changing the set-out times, there's only so much that we can do to address the rat population. But I would now like to turn over to DSNY. I do have questions on the containerization pilot. Can you speak to the effectiveness of it? Can you speak to things that could be done better? What feedback are you getting?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Councilmember. You've been one of the most outspoken allies in the trash revolution. Appreciate your support and willingness to embrace change in your district. Since the start of the containerization pilot on 10 blocks of Hamilton Heights, which began September 12th, rat sighting complaints on those blocks are down 55% compared to the same time period last year. In absolute value, it's a drop from 29 last year to 13, but certainly that's a substantial decrease. We continue to receive very positive feedback from residents of the pilot zone, as well as from the school staff impacted by the schools component of the.
And may I go one more minute? Have you seen what are the rat metrics, especially in the containerization zone? Have you seen a bigger impact there than other parts in the residential? Have you seen an impact there in the rat mitigation zone where there is no containerization? Are you seeing different numbers there?
I don't have the number for the Upper Manhattan zone broadly, although we certainly can get it. But I do know that the decrease within the pilot zone is very noticeable.
Great. And to the extent you can have any more specifics, you can send that over. I know that's very micro data.
That 55%, though, is specific to the pilot zone, and that's
okay, great.
Yeah, so it's 55% decrease.
Specific to the pilot zone.
For the time period from the first day of the pilot to today, as compared to the same days last year. It's down 55%.
Great. And then I know I think you said in the testimony, a prototype of trucks. Can you speak to whether or not those are coming to the pilot zones? How soon?
So what it is I'll back it up a little bit and describe the truck. And this is laid out in the Future Trash Report, I believe it's on pages 71 and 74, the go-forward strategy for on-street containerization for higher density residential buildings is a container that lives on the street and does not have wheels. But in order to lift that container, to get the trash out of it and into the truck, you need a special kind of truck called an automated side loader. And for our one-way streets, you'll need left side and right side automated side loaders. So it's a big undertaking. This truck exists in Europe. It is not, from a regulatory standpoint, as easy as just buying a European one and having it sent over. The requirements for a street legal vehicle in North America are so substantially different that we basically have to start from scratch in the design build of this truck. We are doing that now, and the pilot truck is moving along at a pretty impressive pace. It will not be for the pilot that's running in Hamilton Heights. It's for the go-forward containerization strategy. We didn't want to look at containerization and say, we don't have the truck and it could take a couple of years, so we're not going to do anything. So we started the pilot in Hamilton Heights with a rear-loading tipper truck but the eventual go-forward strategy is a side loading truck.
Thank you so much, chairs. Thank you so much, commissioners. Really appreciate your time today.
I know everyone has to leave, so we're going to crank through, but how many of those trucks are in the works or on the road?
None are on the road.
Okay.
That's still a little ways away, but we're developing a couple to look at.
A couple of them, you said?
I-
More or less?
Yeah,
Do
more.
you not know how many you have in the works?
I do know how many.
Okay,
I have
do
in
you
the
want to
works.
say it?
Yes,
or-
it's 3.
It's 3?
Yes.
Okay, that's very easy to answer, right? Okay, we have Councilmember Menon.
Great, thank you so much, Chair. So last year, my office did research. We looked at every major city, how they were dealing with rat mitigation, and as a result, we found that a technique that was used, Borough RX, which fumigates the tree pits. It's being successfully used in San Diego and Boston. So we brought it to my district last year, and I've continued it this year. We're funding it out of my office, which is, I think, kind of unfortunate because it shouldn't be up to individual council members to have to supplement this. But I do want to ask, we've had tremendous success with this program. And I do want to note, like if you look at Council District 4, which is adjacent to my district all throughout to the south, to the west, every single block, they've had, according to your data, 51% increase in rats. We have not had that at all in Council District 5, and I attribute that in part to our novel method of rat mitigation. So my question is, why can't we use this citywide to really try to target, in particular, the tree pits where the rats are populating, and we know that to be the case?
Thank you, Councilmember, and I want to give you congratulations on that work and the coverage. I think everything that brings attention to this issue is positive for our collective efforts, so thank you. We use Borough X as a city. NYCHA, Parks, DOHMH all employ it as one of our techniques to exterminate rats. It really comes down to, again, we can drop numbers. We know we're successful in extermination as an application, but if we have those other conditions present, namely a food source or harborage, we see those numbers rebound. So while we have coordinated extermination efforts, including the Borough RX in our high areas of need, certainly on our public properties, we're really trying to take an approach of how do we make sure it's integrated with those other components of better waste management, sanitation of the curb, removing of harborage conditions, so when we get 100% extermination, we don't see a rebound in the upcoming months.
So how many of these Borough RX machines does the city currently have?
I do not know an exact number. I can get them. I know we're using them across those agencies I mentioned, primarily in our green spaces. They are a great, safe, effective tool, but they can only be used outside of 10 feet from a building, so they're primarily used in our green spaces.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that data. We've had tremendous success in my district. We started with the 86th Street corridor, went all along 86th Street, and while yes, it still means we have to sometimes go back and supplement the tree pits and the fumigation, it really is working. So I would very much like to see the city adopt this approach in the tree pits and other areas. I hear you about the food source, but again, we know this technique works, and so I'd like to see it used in a more fulsome way.
Absolutely, and love to connect with you more about how you did that in your district to see if there's ways that we can,
Great.
bring it to other districts and council members and talk
Yeah.
about how we build that partnership.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Menon. I'm going to call on Councilmember Botcher.
Good afternoon. In July, the Department of Health announced that the 311 rat activity complaints across the city had decreased by 20% from May to mid-July. Can you tell us the citywide 311 numbers since July to now?
I don't have them in front of me, but happy to share those back with you.
And do you have numbers broken down by council district, community district, zip codes?
Yes, we can share all of that information.
Great.
I'd also say it's all available on open data. We'll help curate it and get it shared over, as well as health department inspection information. So that information is all shared publicly in the idea of data transparency and making sure New Yorkers can access the work we're doing as a city.
So we looked up the zip codes that overlap with our Council District 3 on the west side of Manhattan. From January 1st to December 1st last year, there were 1,127 311 complaints. In 2003, there were 1,122 311 complaints. So it's pretty much flat from 2022 to 2023. The new set-out times started in May. The commercial containerization started this fall. What's your assessment of why the 311 complaints in our district on the west side of Manhattan have pretty much been flat despite these pretty revolutionary changes?
I think each neighborhood has their own kind of interaction with how they utilize 311 and the services they expect from 311. So that could be part of why we're not seeing necessarily the impact from those changes in your district. I know when we conducted a walkthrough, you have a very engaged citizenry. They're informed and they know 311 is how you
Yes, they are.
how you get city services. And that's something we want to amplify to all New Yorkers. 311 is the tool that we use as a city to direct services. Every time a 311 complaint is called into the Department of Health, they send an inspector out to assess that complaint that comes in. So maybe it's a condition of, knowing how to get action taken in your neighborhood. It's definitely something, we would love to partner you with on. And how do we do, I know you already do a lot of engagement at Rat Academies, Days of Action, things of that nature, but how we can make sure your citizenry feels like they're getting the attention they need and seeing the impacts of these larger legislation that we are seeing making an impact on 311 complaints in other districts.
Do you believe that the rat activity has gone down, but 311 calls aren't reflecting that?
We use the 311 metric as one of the things we look at when we're gauging effectiveness, and rattiness in an area. Really, we rely on our Department of Health inspections because we have trained professionals doing an in-depth analysis of each site, inspection of each site, to tell us really what we're seeing in terms of rat activity.
Would you be able to say whether or not rat activity has gone down on the west side of Manhattan or not in the last year?
Right now, I couldn't give you a full analysis of our health inspection data to say if we're seeing that trend.
Okay. What I'd love to do is work with you and determine if we're not supposed to only look at 311 calls, what other metrics should we look at to really get a handle on what's working and what's not? And what's the plan for the year ahead if it is flat, like the 311 data suggests? What are we going to do differently in the year ahead to really see those numbers come down?
Yeah, love to collaborate on that, and I'll plug again nyc.gov/rats. That has the rat information portal. You can see real-time information on all health inspection data. So you can zoom into a property, a block, a neighborhood, and see what the rat activity is in that specific area. So we can talk about targeting, in your district and for the whole city of New York, that plan for next year of, how do we do better? How do we see these numbers drive? We know it comes down to consistency and routinized application. So Corinne had mentioned, I mentioned in my testimony, in a lot of ways we're still feeling the impacts of changes in city operations due to the COVID emergency, but as we get more time under our feet with operations back to the level we've seen before, the better interagency coordination, engagement with the public, engagement with council people, we know that's how we're gonna see the long-term changes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Narcisse. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, chairs. And I have to say thank you to your department. Sanitations have been stepping up, and sometimes you have to tell people when they're doing positive things. But on that note, we still have a lot of work to do. Since the implementation of the new set-out time for residences, especially, has there been an uptick in fines given to the households? Have there been an increase in summons?
Yeah, so as I referenced earlier, the number of summonses that we began issuing well, it started with warnings and then the summonses in May were a drastic increase. Previously, we'd really never issued that many summonses, but I can give you the year-over-year increase. Right now, I just have the numbers that we've issued since the start of the May period.
Okay. Compost is a great thing. As I'm going to say, giving it up to my chair over here, nurse. But one of the concerns the residents have been bringing to our offices, our office here especially, it's about when they pick them up and they're not emptying them out completely, they let things seep on the streets, and they cannot use, from my understanding, can you use bag or not? That's a question too.
Yes, you can use bag.
Okay, because that's concerned, because there was confusion whether to use bags because it's supposed to be sealed in the can, but when they do pick them up, if it's not empty, so you end up with things on the streets.
Councilmember, if I may, I just want to point out that one of the reasons that there's confusion about this, and certainly in our outreach efforts we've got to address that, is that old programs didn't allow bags. And the ability to say, you want to use a bag, you can use a bag, is actually one of the, it required a technological innovation. We got a new piece of equipment that lets us separate out the bags on our end. It's one of the ways that this is the largest and easiest curbside composting program ever. You know, sometimes you try to compost and they say, oh, it's not in the right, you can't, da, 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 da. We've made it a lot easier. So I often tell people when they ask me, am I allowed to use a bag or not? I say, on almost any question you could ask me, you're overthinking it. Just put it out, we'll get it. And then the other item that you mentioned, you're not emptying it completely. We have rules internally about the condition, which we call spillage, is our industry term for when material is left behind. Certainly it's something we take seriously.
By the way, I love those bins. They look very cute and they really seal very tight. Rats is a big problem. It's a huge problem in our city. And one of my concerns, I think someone mentioned it, we have sister cities that they're doing very well. And I have been mentioned that to the chair as well. Why can't, we have to reimagine how we see trash on our streets in New York City. I hate when I go visit other places and people talking about how dirty New York City is. And I take offense to that because that breaks my heart. So now, can we imagine for the next few years how we're gonna address it? Can you collaborate with DOT and come up with a great plan? Because we have to have those bins on our streets to make sure they seal, they close, or else we'll never be able to address rats in our city.
Completely agree, Councilmember. I have two things to say to that. The first is that there is a plan at nyc.gov/future of trash. It's a 100-page report that we put out in April of this year that outlines the next several years of the plan to containerize every piece of trash in New York City. We are well on our way. By this fall, 70% will be in the containers. And so I'll tell you, like, I was just in LA in October, and I heard that from some of the haters and losers out there, of like, oh, New York's so dirty, right? The best thing you can say to them is, I guess you haven't been there recently, because things are changing, and people who come to our city today, they will see the difference.
And I'm not gonna see rats flying all over the place. Like, they look like kind of cats.
If you see the rats flying all over the place after we're done with this, you might want to see an optometrist.
All right, thank you for your service, and I'm sure that we're gonna see a better city, a cleaner city. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you.
Thank you. You know, I get like the rat stuff is really funny, but I have to say, I've had people come into my office who've been bitten by rats. I walk through NYCHA developments where people live with rats. Rodent-infested buildings, rent-stabilized buildings with rat shit everywhere. So this is not funny. It's not some smug thing. People live in really bad conditions with bad rodents. I have people come and tell me that their cars, they gotta put ammonia mats so that the rats don't go to their cars. This isn't a joke. So I understand from a larger narrative point of view that it's a way to elevate the issue and get people engaged and keep it in people's mind, but let's just keep in mind that this is the reality of a lot of people.
That's exactly right, Madam Chair. As a renter in a rat mitigation zone, I take it very seriously. I see the rats every day. It's why I've just chosen to dedicate my career to helping fight back against them. While we're on the subject, I do have the answer to your question about the brown bins.
Thank you.
We distributed 56,252 brown bins in Brooklyn to date. I'm very happy to report that the largest district for both requests and distributions was Brooklyn Community Board 18, so Canarsie, Flatlands, Mill Basin. Again, speaking of the success and efficacy of this program, that there's so much interest outside the traditional beating heart of the compost belt.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilmember Ariola.
Thank you, chairs. Welcome, and thank you for your testimony. I want to speak to something specific that happened in Queens, in my district, because my district is not in a rat zone. However, we had a really bad issue with rats. And I want to thank Director Karate for coming out herself with the Department of Health, with sanitation, and really working with us. It was not a one-day thing. We had to identify the food source. We did. DOHMH went in, inspected the buildings. It was behind a commercial strip. So what I think was really great about it is because all the agencies were there, the community members came out because the rat infestation was so bad that it went to their backyards. And so they knew they had to get exterminators for their area, that was their property. And then the city of New York took care of their property because it was all burrowed in, of course, the tree pits. But most importantly, the DOHMH did enough inspections so that the bad actor who owned a restaurant, we figured out who the food source was. And then once we notified the landlord that they were going to start to get fines, a container went out there. So I want to thank you. There is no more rats in that area, and that's because of your concerted effort. And sanitation, you were great because when there was anything left in the street, you came right out and took care of and picked it up. So I do appreciate what you do, and you know, Deputy Commissioner Goodman, your department is terrific. We work well with your Public Affairs Department, and they've never let us down. So thanks for that. I am a little taken aback by the removal of the baskets off the streets because I know that there were budget cuts to that. What concerns me is, like my colleague said, people will naturally just throw that on the ground. But what's going to happen is our commercial strips where these baskets are being removed, they're storefronts, there are small business owners there, and then they'll be responsible for the dirt and the garbage that's left in front of their building.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate the kind words, first of all. Say a couple things about our thought process in the basket removal plan. Right now, there are maybe 100,000 corners in the city that don't have a litter basket on them, right? That's already the case. You walk down many neighborhoods, you don't see a litter basket in every corner. When there's no litter basket, people don't just drop their litter there. I mean, sometimes they do, and they're breaking the law, and they're cited. We issue violations. We are going to be very thoughtful about a reduction in the number of litter baskets on the street, trying not to focus on the commercial corridors that you're describing to the extent possible, trying to make sure that there's borough equity involved to the extent possible, right? The idea is not to decrease cleanliness. It is to take a very difficult budget cut and try to make it work in a way that does not, because, you know, when the 23,000 baskets, we could have all of them 40% more full, or we could just have fewer of them, you know, and have them all empty so that the rats can't get at the food. So it's a tough decision. I really appreciate the feedback, and we're going to be very thoughtful about the removals.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Councilmember. I forgot to recognize Councilmember Feliz. Thank you for joining us. I have Councilmember Brewer next.
Thank you. Carolyn Bragdon is my hero. We've been doing the walks for the last 20 years together, so I appreciate her very much. Orange bins, I have like 100 questions, so I'll just go them and then you can decide. Orange bins, the problem, I love them, but two things. One, old people don't know how to have an app, older people in my neighborhood. And second, they're often full, but they're not really full. So how do you, what's with the app and that technology problem?
I can say two things about it, Councilmember, because it's the two parts of your question. So I'm going to start with the fullness issue. We actually did identify a technical challenge with the bins where it's an infrared sensor inside.
I use it, I know.
We toned down how quickly they think it's full. We basically adjust it on the back end when the sensor goes off. And we do empty the bins 6 days a week. We get them every day except Sunday.
Okay.
And then on the app side, so one of the topics that we are concerned about when it comes to composting is contamination. Right? And the idea is if there's no locking mechanism on the bin.
No, I understand that. I'm letting you know that the older people don't know how to do the app. They like going to the green market.
Yes.
So I know you want to keep it, and it's the mayor who doesn't. So we're going to work on that. So we need the other opportunities for composting.
If I may just say one thing about the app that I think is really worthwhile and something that you may find useful to tell your constituents, some of them I understand, they're just not going to want to do it. We worked so hard to make this app as user-friendly as possible. One thing that I think is a really interesting story.
But you're under 80.
Your friend Ryan Marola said that the bins that this company makes other locking bins that are used in other cities. In every other city in the world where they have these, the bins play Old MacDonald to distract you from the fact that they're taking forever to unlock, to hide the fact that it's taking a long time.
Okay.
Ryan worked on app updates along with some other members of our team to get them to open so fast that there was no time for the
I got it. I'm just letting you know we still want the other opportunities for composting. Now, let me just tell you about parks and sanitation. I speak pretty plainly. Parks can't handle it. Let me tell you, my parks, we got 2 of them on both sides of the community. They only pick up Monday to Friday. So rats got Saturday and Sunday to have a feast. So I'm telling you right now, whether it's the Broadway malls, which is overflowing, or the Riverside, and I guess this would be the rat czar's issue because nobody else seems to talk to each other in this administration. We have a lot of silos, despite what the mayor says. We got to have sanitation pick up from parks. That's got to happen. Any ideas about that, Madam Ratzar? That would solve the problem. Monday morning, it looks like hell.
Absolutely, and these are pieces we're discussing in our task force. How do we build these efficiencies, commingle operations?
How long do we have to discuss it before it happens? I could do it, the commissioner is willing to do it tomorrow, just FYI, sanitation commissioner.
Great, then we'll bring that back and have those conversations and see about putting it into action. It does come down to resource availability.
She's got the resources.
Great, then I'll have the conversations back and we'll
all the Broadway malls, all Riverside Park, nothing picked up weekends. Lots of food for the rats.
Yes.
Okay. Pigeon feeders, what are you going to do about them? I argue with them. They say the pigeons are hungry.
Yeah, bird feeding is a big issue.
And what are we going to do about it? It's a mental health issue. It involves health department, mental health. I don't know, but they feed the rats too.
The best piece we have right now is education. I know you're doing that on an individual
level. What kind of education
are
you going to tell somebody who says pigeons are hungry?
Yeah, it has to come down to the understanding that they're also feeding rats. Health department has a big campaign around that work.
Okay, well, we can discuss it forever. I'm just saying you got to put a little bit more effort into it. They're going to keep feeding them. We got to figure out something else. It's challenging.
Absolutely.
Okay. Dog people want litter baskets. That's, who's putting, you can talk about household, I got that. I've been doing this, 40 years. Dog people want the litter basket. So please, all I do is write the Department of Sanitation. I want a litter basket. I want a litter basket. I want a litter basket. I do like hundreds of letters for the dog people. Are you going to keep the baskets where the dog people want litter baskets?
As a dog person myself, I have to often carry dog waste for a couple of blocks.
My people don't want to carry it 1 block.
There are responsibilities for pet guardians, right?
Not on the Upper West Side.
To bring an animal into our home, have things that we have to do to take care of
Okay,
them.
I'm just saying, it's an issue, and you're going to get more calls and more 311.
Understood.
So keep
Thank
the
you.
litter basket.
Got it.
Stolen bin, West Side kids got it $200 stolen. How are many getting stolen? Where did they take them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get this question too all the time about
2
what
of them got
happens if my
stolen
bin
last
gets
night,
stolen.
just FYI.
I always tell them if something of yours gets stolen, there's already a process in place. Call NYPD. I don't know why, as we've rolled out the containerization requirements, we've heard from people acting like the idea of stolen property is sort of like a new thing.
Well, it's a new thing for them to have the bin. That's the issue.
The bin is supposed to come inside when you're not using it, or be chained up along the property line.
It can't only chain it to a tree, and you don't want to chain to a tree.
No public property. It's supposed to be.
I know, but there's no place else to chain it.
Within 3 feet of the building line.
Okay, I'm just telling you there are issues that go there. And then just finally, the tree pits. I know you heard about them, but they are a problem because nobody knows. I know you say property owner, but maybe it is between the property owner. It's not clear who the property owner is. We need a better solution on tree pits, just generally. It's not, of course, just rats. It's also, they're filthy dirty. People dump their friggin' garbage in a tree pit. It's unbelievable to me. So who's in charge of these tree pits? You say owner, but that's not really what happens. And they have to be clean. And that's when you say, I agree, you go to another city, and you come back to New York, and we should say, have you been here lately? Unfortunately, these damn people have been here lately, and they still think it's dirty. And some of it is the tree pit. So what is, again, citywide, no silos, let's talk to each other. What's going on with the tree pits?
Yeah, so it's an area of conversation. It is property owner responsibility to keep the tree pits free and clear of litter and debris, including 18 inches out into the sidewalk. Health will do emergency baiting in tree pits, but if we have those other conditions, which becomes a block issue, we will see the rats rebound.
Okay, but I'm letting you know, when you say that it is a property and they're not doing it, then we have to be a little bit more creative as a city and figure out something else. That's not working. Now, with these cars, oh my God, the rats eat all the cars. They just have so what do you tell owners? Is there anything that you can tell them? I mean, I lost 3 cars the other day from my neighbors. Rats.
Yeah, there's no scent or product that keeps rats away that's scientifically proven. So when it comes down to issues with cars, we're talking about community issues and, you know, a piece of tragedy of the commons. If we have conditions conducive and rats active on a block, there's nothing we can do as a city to legislate any changes to how people are parking their vehicles on those
Okay,
streets.
so I guess if you have a 311 complaint, I'll deal with mine, there's a car problem, then you should go to that block and figure out what's going on. Is that something that would be followed up for a 311 complaint?
For a 311 complaint about an abandoned vehicle?
No, about a car that just got eaten by a rat. They go right in there, they eat all the different aspects of a car. I don't own a car, I don't know a damn thing about a car, but they eat everything, and then you can't start the car when you're going to work.
I'll do some investigation. I don't know. I do not believe there's a 311 category specifically for a car impacted by rats, but that's some information we can look into and
Because then you would go to the, as you suggest, go to the block, do a walk around and see who's not putting the garbage out correctly, et cetera. Okay, something to think of. I'm always thinking a little bit more creatively than
Yes.
sometimes city agencies, just a suggestion.
Appreciate it.
All right, and are these new trucks finally quiet? Like, are they gonna pick up things at night quietly? Your 3 trucks or your new trucks or whatever kind of trucks?
So it's actually, it's a great question. The short answer is we're waiting for the truck to come in. It's one of the
Then you
things
can
we're
listen
looking at.
to it.
When we put out the report, there were people who said, but there are automated side loaders already. They use them at the Port of Philadelphia. I watched a video of this industrial one they use in Philadelphia. So loud, completely inappropriate for the Upper West Side or any community in New York City.
damn
So
right.
that's why we're developing a new one with that in mind.
So you're gonna have a quiet truck?
As quiet as possible.
Quiet truck. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Councilmember Brewer. We're going to move on to Councilmember Farias.
Thank you so much, chairs. I do want to quickly just state that in terms of composting, Grow NYC and our other community partners they have an important role in our community composting, especially in our outer borough communities, and I hope that we look at other ways to support them and maintain these efforts in the city. Let's talk about rats. So we did a wonderful tour throughout my district. We're getting an ADA compliance MTA station. Yay, we're excited about that. But we had a bunch of different rodent hotspots throughout the community that were then, though we were integrating a lot of mitigation efforts at the station itself through MTA, the rats were then finding food elsewhere in the surrounding area. So wanted to touch base on the streamlined process. I think what we realized in the tour that we were able to do was everyone was kind of doing efforts on their own. DSNY was kind of touching base with folks, but we really didn't have a full streamlined effort just yet. So our tour was really important in that it happened at the right moment and we were able to streamline that. But how are we navigating the streamlining process? And then have we put into place any efforts around informing the surrounding communities? Like the surrounding community in Parkchester is a bunch of homeowners or co-op owners, and informing them that they may have to take individual independent effort as we're targeting a hotspot area, that they may see rodents in their area and they should take an effort to do so we can dispel of the rodents, period.
Yes, and that's, it was a great walkthrough. I think really showed the example of the challenging work when we're talking about rats in a dense city like New York and our private and public interspaces. The streamlined process, that is the power and the position I serve in. A person whose job is to look across all agencies and bring those conversations together, that coalition together, to make sure we're working outside silos, make sure we're coordinating efforts. both in I'd say, a field operational place. So a big piece we're working on is making sure folks out in the boroughs have each other's contact information and are doing direct contact when they're addressing an issue or seeing hotspots arise. And then that's scaled all the way up to our task force meetings where we're having wholesale conversations about how do we do this work better, how if we're identifying a park and there's a private property or school nearby that's contributing to an issue, that we bring those folks together so we don't just end up chasing kind of the rats from property to property. Department of Health does a tremendous job in public education. I think it's a great idea to expand that work around, we've identified a hotspot, how are we communicating with those neighbors, adjacent properties? And I think that's something, love to partner with. I know when we were there, council member, you took some pamphlets and got right on the ground engaging with the folks at the Green Market, thinking about authentic ways we can really build that community collective effort.
Okay, great. Chairs, if I have a couple follow-up, thank you. And then in terms of working with some of the state authorities, right? MTA is a state authority, NYCHA, for example, is a state authority, but they're here within the city. How are those efforts in communication or with DOHMH or with DSNY?
Yeah, so I'll start with NYCHA. They are a active lead agency in our road mitigation work citywide. We have great relationships with leadership down to the folks doing the work on the ground, and they're a real partner for us in testing out and making sure that what we're doing as a city is also reflected in our public housing. MTA and other state agencies the same, always working to get our best points of contact and build those relationships. So we're seeing the policies, the strategies we're using on city property and for our private property, also on our state-run spaces.
Okay, great. And then just a last question I thought of in terms of Councilmember Botcher's questions. Do we know or have any log of the frequencies of building extermination services to analyze? Like, do we know if there are private buildings, municipally owned buildings, state buildings that have a month-to-month or quarterly or by, every year or frequency of their extermination? And do we analyze that and determine maybe in areas that we aren't seeing high 301 complaints, where we can see there are 25 buildings that require extermination every 3 weeks or every month?
So we as a city do not track private extermination efforts. Department of Health and a lot of their resources to private property owners detail what you can do as a private property owner, the last piece being hired a licensed exterminator to take care of that work.
Okay.
That is typically determined between that service contractor and the person employing the service, paying for the service. So that's not something that we have a central tracking on. I think it often speaks to kind of the collective consciousness and thinking about, how are we addressing pest and those conditions in a neighborhood?
Sure. I guess the thought process that I have is when DOHMH goes out and we get a complaint about a private household, they issue a violation, then we follow up to ensure that they've remedied or have done something. In that same vein, would we not look at super dense buildings in that way and say, how are you mitigating rodent or pest, or even like what we're seeing globally right now with bed bugs happening in Paris? Lots of, it's coming to the side. We see the numbers increasing weekly with bed bug numbers. So just wondering, how do we get ahead of some of this stuff, or how do we use some of this, that even though it's a private building or privately owned household, we do in some way look at it for individual homeowners? I guess I would like to think more creatively and say, how do we then use or encourage building owners to validate the information that they are active partners in the city and also helping with extermination or rodent mitigation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. I'd love to explore it, how, this collective accountability. Again, we have, the formal system through health and inspections, but we can host, education academies with blocks, with buildings, to talk about how that individual ownership gets imbued to our private property owners and how we can better support them. Because the truth is, we need our private property owners to be doing the right thing when it comes to rats, just like we need our city properties to be working in concert.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, chairs.
All right, thank you. I have 4 questions, and then we're going to turn it over to public testimony, which we're going to migrate over. For those of you who are here to testify, we'll be migrating over before we do that. Just with regards to the smart bins, and it's here on this topic because it's related to containerization of food, but the smart bins and the community composters are very different. One primary example is where the outcome is. So the community composters, they collect the food waste, they process it here, they distribute the compost. That compost is used in our street trees, in our parks, and all of that, in all of these public spaces. The smart bins go to the digester eggs and are for the production of methane. So as a comms person, as someone who's done a lot of comms for sanitation, how are you ensuring that you're being very clear with the public that the smart bins are not a composting program, that they are a methane gas production program?
Some of the smart bins do produce compost. The smart bins, particularly on Staten Island, are taken to the Staten Island compost facility and turned into compost there. The Staten Island compost facility, and I've heard this come up a few times, the idea that the New York City sanitation's composting programs don't compost. That facility processes about 150 million pounds of leaf and yard waste per year, and we're engaged in a major upgrade to it now that will take that number to over 200 million. We've produced, on average, roughly 42 million pounds of finished compost per year for the last decade or so. And that material, 40% of it is distributed to parks, community groups, community gardens. 60% of it is sold to landscapers. We expect the amount given away for free to increase substantially as the capacity goes up. So I want to begin by saying there is a false narrative that the material that you put out for curbside compost collection or put in the smart composting bin is not composted.
Okay, so what's the percentage? You're saying Staten Island? Yes.
The smart bins, yes.
Okay, so what about Brooklyn and Queens?
I want to be careful about that. I can give you some information.
Great.
I want to be careful about it because we have an active procurement going on to develop new back-end processing capacity. And if I'm sitting here and I say, we want more of this kind or that kind, that prejudices the procurement. I don't know what the current state is today, but I can tell you that we are working on changing that. The other thing
But you can say, is the back end process, procurement process for composting or for methane gas?
Just for the processing of source-separated organic material as part of the city's curbside composting program. Right now, the city operates a large wastewater treatment plant at Newtown Creek. That plant is powered by electricity. That electricity could come from fracked gas, or it could come from material put in the smart.
We understand that part.
I want to say for the record that I believe it is a good thing for that plant, which needs to exist to process our wastewater, to be powered by food waste that would otherwise go to landfill. Decomposition produces greenhouse gases. Let's put those greenhouse gases to use.
Right, so what my original question was, how are you ensuring in the messaging that New Yorkers understand the differences between where this material is potentially going?
We've been very clear that the focus of this program is beneficial use. I said it to the New York Times. I'm not sure how much more clear we could be, that the goal is to make sure the material does not go to landfill, that the material does not become rat food.
So where does the material that comes out of the dehydrated, out of the eggs go?
Well, I know that the solids, which are just a small piece of what's left
digestate, where
over,
does it go?
Some of it, Councilmember, some of it is used for the capping of landfills, and some of it becomes fertilizer, biosolid fertilizer.
And none of it ends up inside the landfill?
The DEP operates the facility. You'd have to ask them. I'm sorry.
Well, we've asked them, and we've actually asked people who've gone out to the landfills in Ohio, and it is not only being used for capping. So I just want to make sure we're being clear all the way through and through to New Yorkers that this material does and potentially end up, and a percentage does end up in a landfill.
And may I ask what it becomes if there's no curbside composting program?
I think we should be investing in more composting facilities.
Okay, I
Hands
guess
down. That's my position. I'm not saying I'm against all of it. I'm saying in proportion.
I understand.
I would like that. I understand that's not the point of this hearing, but I just wanted to walk that all the way through.
I agree, Councilmember, that it's worth discussing today. If I may respectfully make one other point, as I think you have encountered a very frustrating situation in the past, which is this pernicious myth about recycling, metal, glass, plastic, and paper recycling. People say, I don't really have to do that, right? Doesn't it all get thrown away? It all gets thrown out, right? I don't have to separate. And we know that's false. It gets recycled, it gets put to beneficial use. I'm very cautious about the idea that we are now creating a pernicious myth around composting. I don't really have to do it. I heard in a council hearing that it goes into a landfill. It's not true. We put it to beneficial use. And I want to be very clear. New Yorkers should separate their material as part of the largest and easiest curbside composting program ever created.
We all want that to happen, and no one's trying to create false narratives here. And that's why I'm asking you to make sure that's not happening.
Thank you for the opportunity to
Thank
speak
you.
about it.
Okay, so Councilmember Chiose, I just wanted to recognize you. Oh, and you do have a question. Okay, I just have a question related to NYCHA. Early 2023 reporting stated that dozens of NYCHA basements remain dirt uncapped by concrete. Can you describe kind of where we are at in that process of finally sealing off these basements? And if there's anything related to schools, I thought some schools were left also uncapped, but I'm not sure. But if you could just give us an update on where we are.
Yeah, so I'll speak high level to NYCHA, and then further questions we can refer to them for details. As I mentioned, NYCHA is employing a plethora of exclusion methods. So that's door sweeps, that's wire lathe, the rat slabs, which is the capping off of dirt crawl spaces. As of 2019, they had 50 rat slabs installed across, let me get my numbers here, 10 developments, and with the Harlem Road Mitigation Zone standing up, announced this April, there's an additional 6 slabs being put in. As it refers to Department of Education, we'll have to direct that question to them.
Okay, thank you. I know there was a line of questioning about DOB, but just to get it, I wasn't fully clear on what was being said. So I know that with the law, people who are trying to get the construction permit have to upload, they self-certify. How are you just, they put up the certificate, I got an exterminator, I got someone who's gonna come, but beyond that process, is there any additional verification strategies?
Yes, so it's several levels of verification exist within the department. First of all, in the most obvious, certain construction site, we created, let me take it back, created a unit which is called Construction Safety Compliance, in which unit proactively visit the construction site. And obviously, part of these inspections, observation of the housekeeping. As I said, we're not specifically targeting rats, and we're not looking for them, but we're well aware that condition about poor housekeeping is a blinking light which lead to the safety accidents. And to us, when we see the poor housekeeping, this is a really good cause to initiate conversation with the contractor or competent person who is in charge of construction site. On top of this, as you know, certain construction sites required construction superintendents, construction site safety manager. They obligated to keep the record and perform daily inspections. So the part of daily inspections, they're supposed to mention about housekeeping. And as I said, it's a poor housekeeping it's kind of serious, which could lead to much serious violations.
Okay, thank you for that additional explanation. My last question, and then I'll turn it over to Councilmember Osei, is OMB, when we had our exec budget hearing last year, or no, the final OMB hearing, they said they had adopted climate budgeting as part of its ongoing commitment to addressing the climate crisis. And one of these, I guess the benefit of it is that they would be offering sustainability and resiliency evaluation tools to compare different types of operations in consistent ways, such as CO2 avoided or how projects contribute to citywide resiliency. Has OMB provided DSNY any guidance on these tools yet?
Not that we're aware of at this time yet.
Okay, thank you. That's my last question. Councilmember Osei, do you want?
Thank you so much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. My apologies if this question was asked already, but I'm just looking in the testimony. Has there been an update on the results of the containerization plan in Hamilton Heights? My apologies if that was probably asked during this hearing, but would love to learn about that.
It was, but I'm happy to recap. We're very proud of the developments in that program. Within the 10-block pilot zone, the rat sightings to 311, so we'll look at the period from when the pilot started, which was September 12th, to the present, and compare it to that same set of days last year. Sightings of rats are down 55%.
Mm-hmm. And what's the plan for expansion then?
The plan is really laid out in the Future of Trash report, which is to develop this side-loading truck and fixed on-street containers. This specific pilot is likely not going to expand in this form. It provides us with a lot of information that we're going to use to roll out broader containerization measures.
So I haven't read the trash report, my apologies, but is there a timeline in terms of the process and when we'll...
There's not a specific timeline laid out in there. What I can recap to get to 100%.
Sure.
I'll recap very quickly what we've done so far. So first we changed the set out times, which incentivized containerization. Then we mandated containerization for first food-related businesses, then chain-related businesses, then all businesses. And then we announced in October of this year that starting in the fall of next year, all residential buildings with 1 to 9 units will have to use individual containers. And then 2 years after that, they'll have to use the standard official NYC container. Those announcements alone get us to 70% containerization. The plan for that final 30%, which is the high-density residential, is in formation now based on the results of the Hamilton Heights pilot. We are excited to be operating at what I certainly consider to be a very fast pace, and I think we're going to have more to say of it in just the next couple of months.
Great. And what are the communities that you are considering to become or...
Citywide.
Citywide, okay, great.
The whole city is going to be containerized under our current thinking.
Sure.
Not neighborhood by neighborhood, but building type by building type.
Okay. Another question that I have is, according to the committee report, my district, the 36th district in Brooklyn, has the third longest mean response time to 311 complaints at 2 days. Yet Bedford-Stuyvesant is considered one of the areas where rat issues in New York City are some of the worst, right? I know my community is one of the 4 rat mitigation zones. What is the response for this long 311 response time, and how do we fix that?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying as a rodent mitigation zone, there's proactive indexing, which means health inspections of every property twice a year in the parts of your district that are rodent mitigation zones. For 311 complaints, everyone does solicit a response by Department of Health if it's a rat sighting. And that's something, I don't know, Corinne, if you want to expand on that, or something we can definitely take a look at about varying response times and see if there's something we can, uncover to make sure we're providing equity across all the districts.
Can I just add to that, just across all 311 complaints, sanitation related, each 311 complaint type has a prerequisite service level agreement, meaning the response that we have to get back to the resident. We've recently started having what we call trash dash meetings, where we have our district superintendents come down every week, on rotation, and we stress the importance of meeting those service level agreements. So that should hopefully be an improvement, at least on the sanitation related SRs for your district.
All right, thank you, and thank you, chairs.
I just want to thank you, members of the administration, for testifying today. It was nice to meet you at a hearing for the first time. Really appreciate all of your answers. We'll send a list of follow-up questions, but thank you very much for being here. I believe we are going to transition for members of the public who are here to testify. We're going to transition to the committee room. And we're going to take a 5-minute break for the chairs.